Hello and welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for All This and Rabbit Stew, released in 1941. It's the 340th in the series and it's directed by, well, nobody according to the title card, but of course it's Tex Avery. It is the 7th in the infamous Censored 11 series of cartoons. As such, there is no official release, but hey, this one is in the public domain. So in case you haven't seen this one, I mean, it is out there, as I said, it's in the public domain, but if you don't want to see it because of the imagery, all that happens is, it's pretty much like a wild hare. So you've got a hunter, in this case it's a black hunter, after Bugs Bunny, and Bugs Bunny just messes with him for the whole short. So first up, you're going to see a re-edit of the original commentary track that was done, which is actually still up, given that this is a public domain cartoon, but hey, I thought I'd put it in here for completeness sake. My good friend Blue Genocide not only re-edited that original commentary track, he was with me, so you'll hear both of us, and then afterwards you'll hear some new thoughts from me, along with a very brief history on Step and Fetch It, who is caricatured here. So grab some popcorn and enjoy the review. Here with me to discuss this cartoon is my good friend Blue Genocide. Say hi.
First an All Curious Puppies cartoon, now we got racism. Thanks, Anthony.
But to put into context, this is not some random, lazy African-American thing that Tex Avery is going for. He was parodying an actor at the time named Stephen Fetchit, and he's actually been in 2 Looney Tunes cartoons prior. He had a brief cameo in Porky's Road Race, and he was featured prominently in another Censored 11 cartoon by Friz Freleng called Clean Pastures, and his whole shtick, if you will, was to play this lazy African-American stereotype, and even back then, a lot of African-Americans weren't exactly happy to see this sort of performance on screen. And I guess the biggest shame about this cartoon is that if you were to replace this stereotype with even just Elmer or something, it would actually be quite funny. There's a lot of really funny gags in this one. I actually grew up with this cartoon. It was actually because it's in public domain. Of course, it's going to be featured on a public domain thing, but now looking at it, I'm thinking, wow, even in the 90s where I was, this was in the public domain VHS. I'd be curious to know if any of you in the US, if this was featured in the public domain collections.
I'm part of the early YouTube generation. I'll tell you this right now, this cartoon was all over YouTube from the beginning.
As it would be, being public domain, but
I never found this on a public domain DVD. I don't know why, but I just assume that maybe public domain DVDs at the time had a little bit more class than just to put this one out there because of its status.
Absolutely.
Even the animation, like right here, when he like realizes, that's great stuff. And if it was any other character, this would be one of the funniest gags ever. And in fact, the reaction right here is amazing.
Exactly. He is pissed off. I want to point out as well.
If that was Elmer, like, that would be great.
So you can find the rest of that conversation over on the actual commentary track, which is still in full on the channel. Now, a few things I didn't point out. The title itself is a play on the 1940 film All This and Heaven 2. Well, as you'd expect, the short's got nothing to do with that film, but yeah, it's just a play on that title. The other major bit of trivia is that this hunter is based off of Step and Fetch It, and since he's a main staple for the majority of the Censored 11 shorts, whether directly like in this cartoon or indirectly via stereotyping, I figure here is a good place to chat about him and to put into context about who he is and why is he featured in a lot of mainly 1930s cartoon shorts. So his real name is Lincoln Theodore Monroe Andrew Perry, but he took on the stage name of Step and Fetch It, which is a play on Step and Fetch It, and there are some varying stories about how that name came about. And he was a vaudevillian a comedian and then became a film actor, and he was very successful in the 1930s. So much so that he was the first black actor to be a millionaire despite not getting equal pay to his white counterparts, and he actually received screen credit for his work. During the height of his popularity, he played a persona that was akin to being, quote-unquote, the laziest man in the world, which was contrary to who he actually was in real life. He was actually very highly literate, and he was even writing for the black newspaper, the Chicago Defender. This persona would be in the 44 films he made during the height of his popularity. He would temporarily stop acting, and he would only really start again when he started having money troubles, appearing mainly in bit parts, up until having a stroke in 1976, and he ultimately passed away in 1985. The movies he was in during the height of his popularity had since been a source of controversy, as the part he played had been seen as a harmful negative stereotype, implying African Americans are lazy by nature. And that's not even just now. This also was happening in the 1930s, where black leaders were putting pressure on Hollywood to stop putting this type of stereotype on the screen. Now, author Mel Watkins, who wrote a detailed book on the life of Fetchit, and there'll be a link below to the book, offers a contrary view, and I quote, "The lazy man that Perry played was based on something that had come from slavery," Watkins says. "It was called putting on old massa. Break the tools, break the hoe, do anything to postpone the work that had to be done. Finally, the white characters would become exasperated and do the work themselves, and blacks understood it perfectly and laughed heartily at it," Watkins says. For his part, Perry was laughing all the way to the bank. By the mid-1930s, he was a multi-millionaire with a fleet of luxury cars and expensive suits, end quote. Now, whatever view you have of Steppen, there is one thing that is absolutely clear. He was so successful, contrary to the many black actors who were often relegated to bit parts like hotel porters, servants, bartenders, and the like, that he was ripe for caricature, as with any other celebrity at the time. Celebrities would be caricatured based on one element of their personality or looks, like Clark Gable's ears, or some sort of event that had occurred with their involvement, such as Greta Garbo saying, "I want to be left alone," with my poor accent there. So when Steppen was caricatured, they just took the character he was doing and exaggerated it further. Now, does this make his appearances in these cartoons any easier to watch? No, of course not. But this is the why it happened. Now, I mentioned before that Steppen stopped acting in 1940, and by this point his star was actually already beginning to wane. Yet this short was released in 1941, and later on we see another caricature of Steppen in 1944 in Goldilocks and the Jiving Bears. And this just shows how popular he really was, and how he was still embedded in the minds of popular culture. So aside from Steppen, this one is also interesting because this is another early Bugs Bunny short where the so-called rules for the character had not been fully established. So for example, when Bugs reacts to the hunter and his body just breaks up all of a sudden, that sort of thing didn't really happen later on. Also, Bugs works best when he's up against characters who need to be taught a lesson. And here, look, he's up against a hunter that's really isn't a threat at all. He's just someone that's, he's kind of forced to hunt. You kind of feel sorry for him. And, when Bugs is up against him, it just doesn't feel right. Whereas Elmer Fudd, he's out hunting for sport, and you feel that Bugs really does need to take him down a peg. But could this short have worked better with Elmer instead of this hunter? Maybe. But even if you did swap out the hunters, and they actually did that with the best gag of the short, with the log scene, where they would reuse it in a later short, but is this short any good? Now, I said in the original commentary that this is quite funny, and in a lot of parts it is, but ultimately, when you factor in the really good gags and the really average ones, this short, it's just average. Now, you can see Tex continue to experiment with gags, some of which he'd actually perfect later on at MGM. Some work, like I mentioned the log gag, and the cave sequence is very top-notch as well. And a few just didn't work for me, like the bullet gag. Yeah, it's funny in parts, but I felt it just took way too long, and it took away from the story, so we sort of like the story just paused, and we had that scene. And, of course, the notorious end gag involving gambling, because, we all know black characters, they just love their gambling, Now, I can forgive Bugs not being quite the Bugs we all know and love in this short, because it was the early days. Think of it as like a season 1 sort of thing where they're still figuring things out. This one just lacks the energy of something like a Wild Hare, which of course is a very similar short involving, Hunter and Bugs. Was Tex actually made to make another short just like a Wild Hare because of how popular that short was? And he was just going through the motions because he's someone that really doesn't want to repeat himself? Well, who knows? Who knows? But look, this one gets a 5 out of 10, with the score mainly reflecting on the gags that actually do work in this one to me. But again, it's in the public domain. I'm not going to put it on this review, so I'm sure you can find it and, make up your own mind about it. But that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care.